My son called to brag that his mother-in-law had bought a mansion and asked when I was finally going to have some success in life. So I went to her housewarming party in my plain gray dress, let them laugh at my old house, and waited until my lawyer walked in with the deed they thought didn't exist. The night my son called to tell me his mother-in-law had purchased a 6,400 square foot home in a gated community, I was standing in my backyard pulling aphids off my roses with my bare hands. It was a Tuesday, June, just past 7 in the evening. The light had gone gold the way it does in early summer, and I'd been working in the garden since 4. Not because I had to, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I like roses, and I like the feeling of working with my hands when the day is winding down. I had dirt under my fingernails and a smear of fertilizer on my left forearm, and I was entirely, completely happy. Then my phone rang. Mom. Liam's voice carried that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over the past 2 years, the one that entered whenever Chloe was in the room. Performative, slightly elevated, like he was addressing an audience. Liam, I said, how are you? Patricia bought a mansion, 6 bedrooms, pool, a chef's kitchen with German appliances. A pause that was too deliberate to be accidental. When are you going to have some success in life? I squeezed the garden hose. The water stopped. I want to tell you, I said something cutting, something composed and measured that demonstrated exactly how little his words could touch me. The truth is, I stood there in my garden with the hose in my hand and the last of the golden light coming through the oak trees. And I didn't say anything for so long that he actually spoke again. She built something, Mom. She had vision. I don't know what to tell people when they ask about you. I have to say, you're still in that old house doing nothing productive. It's embarrassing. Chloe's mother, I said, is what a real woman looks like. He didn't say it as a question. He said it like a conclusion he'd already reached. Sure, I said. I didn't raise my voice. That's one way to look at it. You've had every opportunity. I have. And what do you have to show for it? I looked around my garden. At the Cecile Brunner climbers, I'd trained up the south-facing fence over 11 years. At the vegetable beds I'd built from cedar planks in 2018. At the house behind it, with its old stone chimney and its wood-paneled library and the workshop where I'd spent 8 years developing the patent that funded everything that came after. At all of it, which Liam had not visited once in 2 years. Funny you ask, I said. I bought a property too, 2 years ago. You tore up the invitation. He laughed. A single sharp sound, like a door slamming. The lake house? Mom, that's not— I have to finish in the garden, I said. Give Chloe my love. I hung up first. 10 minutes later, Chloe's text arrived. She typed the way she spoke, gracious on the surface, serrated underneath. It's not personal, Eleanor. You've always been more simple. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone at their own level. Kisses. I read it 3 times. Set the phone on the garden wall, picked it back up. Then I called Benjamin. To understand what happened at Patricia Ashworth's housewarming party, you need to understand how I got there. Not just to the party, but to this particular moment in my life, standing in someone else's garden with dirt on my hands and my son's contempt in my ear. My name is Eleanor Reyes. I am 57 years old. I was married for 22 years to a man named David, who was kind and warm and died of pancreatic cancer in 2014, 3 weeks after our son's college graduation. I raised Liam largely alone. David traveled for work for most of those years, and while he was a good provider and a good man, the daily architecture of our family was mostly mine. I was not a simple woman, though I have always preferred to appear that way. I spent 12 years working as a materials engineer for a commercial flooring company, which is as unglamorous as it sounds, and also where I developed a quiet obsession with polymer compounds that most people found profoundly boring. I found it fascinating. There is something about the molecular behavior of adhesives under stress, the way they hold or fail, the precise conditions under which a bond becomes permanent versus temporary, that I found genuinely beautiful. The way other people find music, or architecture, or the sea. I spent 8 years, alongside my regular job and after my children were in bed, developing a flexible adhesive compound for use in industrial and medical flooring installations. A compound that could bond to irregular surfaces without off-gassing. That last part was the key. The existing products in that space had a VOC problem that made them unsuitable for healthcare environments, and I had an idea about a polymer chain configuration that might address it. I tested it in the garage. I failed for 3 years, kept a lab notebook that David once flipped through and pronounced completely incomprehensible, and eventually produced something that worked. A compound that, it turned out, there was a significant market for. I filed the patent in 2009. I licensed it to a manufacturing company in 2013 on terms that Benjamin, who I'd found through a referral from David's oncologist of all people in those last brutal weeks, told me were substantially better than you'd get if you didn't know what you were doing. I did know what I was doing. I'd spent 6 months reading licensing agreements before I signed one. By the time David died, the licensing income had been quietly building in an account I'd opened in my own name, because even in a good marriage I'd learned that financial independence was not a luxury, it was a form of dignity. Not because David would have taken it, he wouldn't have, but because dignity doesn't depend on the intentions of the person next to you. It depends on what you've built for yourself in the event that everything changes. Everything changes. That I knew. After David, I kept working. I consulted with 3 flooring manufacturers on product development. I licensed a second, smaller patent in 2017. I made careful investments, REITs, index funds, friends. A small position in a biomedical materials company that I understood well enough to watch closely. The kind that don't make interesting dinner party conversation. The kind that compound slowly and reliably over years. I drove the Subaru. I tended the garden. I went to bed at 10 and woke at 5:30 and lived a life that, from the outside, looked exactly like what Liam had told his in-laws it was. I didn't tell people because there was no reason to tell people. Money that announces itself tends to attract the wrong attention, and I had watched, over the years, what happened to women who announced themselves too early, who let their accomplishments become the first thing a room knew about them. The room stopped seeing the woman. It only saw the number. I wasn't interested in being a number. I was interested in being left alone to grow roses and work on problems I found interesting. Liam knew his father's life insurance had been modest. He knew I drove a 10-year-old Subaru and shopped at the farmer's market and wore sensible shoes. He'd formed a picture of me from those facts, and the picture was one he'd apparently shared with his wife's family, and the picture bore very little resemblance to my actual financial situation. This is not a story about money, though money is part of it. It's a story about what people decide to believe about a quiet woman, and what happens when the quiet woman gets tired of letting them. I had met Patricia Ashworth 4 times before the night of the party. The first time was at Liam and Chloe's engagement dinner, at a restaurant in the financial district where the portions were architectural and the bill was impressive. Patricia arrived in a cream-colored suit and immediately began restructuring the seating arrangements. She introduced herself to me by saying, "Oh, you're Liam's mother. He said you were self-sufficient." The way she said self-sufficient communicated clearly that she considered it a consolation prize. She was 62, recently divorced from Gerald Ashworth, retail real estate developer, semi-retired, still generous with his ex-wife's settlement, and had parlayed that settlement into a career as a lifestyle brand consultant, which as far as I could tell meant she helped wealthy women buy the right things in the right order and photograph them. She had a following. She had a podcast. She had apparently now a mansion. She was not a stupid woman. I want to be clear about that. Stupid women don't concern me. Patricia Ashworth was intelligent and strategic, and had spent 40 years carefully assembling a version of herself that was impenetrable to most scrutiny. What she was not was careful about the people she decided didn't matter. The second time I met her, at Christmas the year Liam and Chloe were married, she handed me a gift bag containing a book called 50 Ways to Find Purpose After 50. It was inscribed, "For Eleanor, it's never too late to bloom, Patricia." The third time, at Chloe's birthday dinner, she introduced me to her friends as Liam's mother, She Gardens. The fourth time, at a family brunch 6 months before the housewarming, she asked me in front of 7 people whether I'd considered a nice little part-time job at a garden center, something to give your days some structure. I had smiled. I had said it sounded lovely. I had, under the table, quietly sent Benjamin a text that said, "Move the timeline up." Benjamin Harrison had been my lawyer and financial advisor for 9 years. He was 44, Yale Law, previously a partner at a firm I won't name for privacy reasons, and had left corporate practice to run a boutique firm specializing in asset management and estate planning for clients who prioritize discretion over visibility. He found people like me, women especially, he'd told me once, who'd built things quietly and had no interest in being loud about it, and he was very good at his job. We had spent the past 2 years doing something specific and deliberate. When Liam and Chloe got married, and it became clear that the Ashworths were going to be a permanent feature of my son's life, and that the feature would involve a sustained campaign to establish that their family was architecturally superior to mine, I had made a decision. Not out of spite, though I won't pretend there was no satisfaction in it, out of self-respect, and out of a dawning realization that the story they were telling about me was going to harden into the story Liam believed, unless I did something to interrupt it. So I had purchased a property, not a modest property, the kind of property that makes real estate agents go quiet for a moment before they speak. The Hartwell estate sat on 11 acres in the Lake District, 40 minutes from the city. Main house, 8 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library with original millwork, a restored carriage house, a private dock, and a kitchen that had been featured in 2 design magazines. I had purchased it for $2.3 million cash 2 years prior, renovated it over 18 months with an interior designer named Miriam Kessler, who had done the kind of work that made Miriam weep slightly when we walked through it for the final time. I sent Liam an invitation to the housewarming. He'd called me 2 days later. "Mom, I appreciate the gesture, but we're not going to be able to make it." His voice was odd, strained. Later, Chloe told me he'd received the invitation, looked at it, and said, "It's probably some little lakeside cabin. She probably borrowed money for it, and he'd thrown it away. They had never come. They had never asked, and I had never offered, because I was waiting." The invitation to Patricia's housewarming party arrived via Chloe, forwarded with a note that said, "Mom really wants you there, Eleanor. It would mean a lot to show everyone what a complete family Liam has," which meant, "Come so we can demonstrate the contrast. Come so we can be generous in public about how little you have." I RSVP'd yes immediately. I told Benjamin. He cleared his calendar for the evening. I wore a plain gray dress. I had nicer things. Miriam had insisted on accompanying me to a boutique in the city when we were finishing the estate, and I owned several pieces that would have silenced a room. I wore the gray dress on purpose. I did my own hair. I wore my simple gold studs, my wedding rings, which I've never stopped wearing. I wanted to look exactly like what they thought I was. The drive to the Ashworth mansion took 22 minutes. It was impressive from the gate. I'll give her that. 4,000 square feet of limestone and glass in a development called the the reserve, which had a guard booth and manicured topiary and a fountain at the entrance that was slightly too large for the space. The architect had done something clever with the facade. Inside, from what I could see before I'd even walked through the door, the rooms opened into each other in a way that made the house feel twice its actual size. It was beautiful, genuinely beautiful. I recognized Miriam's influence in the kitchen immediately, the same German porcelain tile she'd tried to talk me into at the estate before I'd chosen the reclaimed oak instead. Patricia met me at the door. "Eleanor, so glad you came." 2 air kisses that touched nothing. Her eyes ran up and down my gray dress in a single pass that lasted less than a second. "You look appropriate." She gave me the tour personally. Italian lamps, award-winning art, a Basquiat print, a Hockney lithograph, 2 pieces by artists I didn't recognize but whose names she said with specific weight. German porcelain floors at $200 per square meter, a wine cellar with a glass viewing panel, a bathroom with a soaking tub positioned to overlook the rear garden. At every stop, she explained what everything cost. At every stop, she gave me a moment to absorb it, the way you give a child a moment to absorb a lesson. I smiled. I said the right things. I held my champagne flute and looked around at all of it and thought, Miriam would have done this better. There were 53 people in that house. I counted. Business contacts, lifestyle brand clients, Chloe's friends from the tennis club, a local city councilman and his wife. 3 people I recognized from Patricia's podcast. Liam was near the fireplace with 2 men in their 30s, laughing at something. The version of himself he was around the Ashworths. Louder, more expansive, performing. He caught my eye from across the room, gave me a tight smile, looked away. I took a small plate of canapes and found a chair near the rear window and sat quietly and watched the room, the way I used to watch a lab when I was testing compounds, looking for the behavior, the pattern, the structure underneath the surface. At 8:15, Patricia tapped her champagne flute with a ring. The room gathered, the conversations tapered. 53 people turned toward their host, faces open and expectant, the particular attention people give to someone whose home they are standing in. "I want to say a few words," Patricia said, "about what this house means to me. And I want to say something to the people in this room who made it possible." She was good at this. I'll give her that too. Her voice had exactly the right register. Warm, unhurried, privately amused at her own good fortune in a way that felt generous rather than gloating. She thanked her designer. She thanked Gerald with a diplomatic grace that got appreciative murmurs. She talked about vision and patience and not being afraid to claim the life you'd built. Then she looked at me. "I also want to thank Eleanor for coming tonight. I know environments like this can be difficult to navigate when you come from more modest circumstances, but that's what family is for." She smiled at me across the room. We hold each other up, pitying smiles from every direction. A woman near the bar touched the arm of the woman beside her. Someone near Liam made a small sound, not quite laughter, but adjacent. I smiled back, serene and uncomplicated. Then Chloe stepped forward. Green dress, hair in a perfect chignon. That particular smile she wore when she'd already won, open, beautiful, with teeth. "I want to add something," she said. Her voice was clear and carrying, the voice of someone who has done public speaking training. "Liam comes from humble origins. His mother did what she could, and I think we can honor that without romanticizing it. A beat, just long enough. But my husband understood early that to grow, you have to surround yourself with people who are building something. People who inspire you to reach." She looked directly at me, held my gaze. "Let me understand." Then she raised her glass. "To knowing the difference between people who build empires and people who just survive." Laughter from the crowd, warm and social, not cruel. They didn't think they were being cruel. They thought they were celebrating something real. Liam raised his glass too. He didn't look at me. I set down my champagne flute on the table beside me, checked my phone. 8:28 p.m. I typed 2 words and sent them. "Enter now." The doorbell rang at 8:29. Patricia frowned. She was still basking, still accepting congratulations, still the center of the room that was her room. "We're not expecting anyone." A waiter moved to answer it. Benjamin Harrison walked in. Charcoal suit, the good one, the Brioni, which he only wore when he wanted a room to recalibrate immediately. Leather briefcase, the battered saddleback that was 20 years old and looked like authority. Silver laptop under one arm. He didn't rush. He didn't look around. He crossed that porcelain floor through 53 people in designer clothes with the unhurried certainty of someone who had walked into rooms like this many times and had never, not once, been the person who should feel out of place. He stopped in front of me. "Good evening, Mrs. Reyes," his voice carries. That was one of the first things I'd noticed about him, 9 years ago. Patricia stepped forward. Her hostess smile was still on, but something had shifted in her eyes. That flicker of reassessment, almost imperceptible, that happens when something enters a room that doesn't fit the expected pattern. "Who are you? This is a private event." "Benjamin Harrison." He extended his hand. She didn't take it. "Attorney and financial advisor to Mrs. Eleanor Reyes. She's asked me to present some documentation this evening. I'll need your television, if you don't mind." A beat of silence. "Documentation," Patricia repeated. Chloe let out a laugh, sharp, a little high. "Eleanor has a lawyer? Here?" She looked at Liam. Liam was looking at me. What is this about? The old house?" Someone near the bar actually snickered. Benjamin opened his laptop. He connected a single cable to the input port on the large format television that dominated the north wall of Patricia's main room, the television that had been showing a rotating gallery of tasteful interior photography all evening. He did it without asking again, without rushing. frustrating. Without acknowledging the room's reaction at all, the screen went dark. Then it came up. I should explain what Benjamin brought that night because the explanation matters. 2 years before, when I purchased the Hartwell estate, I had also retained a forensic accountant named Diane Chen, CPA, CFE, 23 years in practice, specializing in asset tracing and financial fraud examination. I had retained her for a specific reason. Over the 18 months prior to purchasing the estate, I had noticed something. Liam had changed. Not gradually, the way people change in marriages, adapting to their partner's rhythms and preferences. Liam had changed sharply, directionally, as if someone had adjusted a dial. The contempt he now expressed toward me, the embarrassment, the insistence that I was simple, that I had achieved nothing, was too practiced, too specific in its targets. It tracked too precisely with whatever narrative the Ashworths had been presenting to him about his family of origin. I had started paying attention to Patricia earlier than the brunch. The truth is, I had been paying attention since the Christmas gift, since 50 Ways to Find Purpose. After 50 with its chirpy inscription, which I had put in the donation bag that same evening, not from wounded pride, but because I recognized it. That gift was not an accident. That gift was a message, delivered with plausible deniability inside a bow. I had sent enough careful messages in my professional life to know what one looked like. What followed, over the next 2 years, was a slow and consistent campaign. It was never overt. Patricia was too intelligent for overt. It operated through tone, through implication, through the carefully chosen comment that planted an image and then retreated into warmth and hospitality before you could respond to it. She was good at it. I am certain she had done it before, to other people, in other contexts. Women like me were not her first project. What I noticed over those 2 years was Liam, the way his language shifted, the specific words he reached for when he talked about my life. Modest, simple, her own level. Words that don't spontaneously occur to a 40-year-old man to describe his mother. Words that come from somewhere. Words that get repeated until they're familiar enough to feel like your own thought. I noticed the way he stopped asking about my work. He'd never asked often. Engineering was never his interest, but he'd asked. The question stopped somewhere in the second year of his marriage and didn't come back. I noticed the way his silences on the phone took on a particular quality. Not distance, exactly. Something more deliberate. As if he were holding something back, or had been told to hold something back, and was working at it. I'm not telling you this so you'll blame Patricia entirely. Liam is a grown man. He made choices. He allowed a picture of his mother to become fixed in his mind and did not question it. And the reasons for that are complex and probably include things about his childhood that I've had a long time to sit with. I'm not the perfect mother. I was, for years, a mother who worked very hard and was present in ways that counted and absent in ways that also counted. And Liam carries both. But the contempt was not his own. The contempt had been imported. And that, specifically that, I would not leave alone. What she found, over 14 months of careful work, was this. Gerald Ashworth's real estate development company, the one from which Patricia's settlement had come, had used a subsidiary structure to engage in a series of transactions that were, in Diane's formal language, inconsistent with arm's-length dealing and indicative of deliberate asset concealment for purposes of settlement manipulation. In plain language, Gerald had hidden money during the divorce to reduce Patricia's settlement, and Patricia, who had signed the settlement, had received less than she was legally entitled to by a significant margin. That was interesting, but it wasn't mine. What was mine was this. The same subsidiary structure had, on 3 occasions over a 4-year period, transferred funds into an account jointly held by Chloe Ashworth and Liam Reyes, my son's account. Funds that had moved through shell companies, been laundered through a series of consulting fee invoices to an LLC that Chloe had registered under a name I didn't recognize, and ultimately landed in accounts that were used, in part, to fund the lifestyle Liam and Chloe had been presenting as self-made success. The amounts weren't enormous, a combined $340,000 over 4 years. But the structure was deliberate, and the documentation trail was a forensic accountant's gift, meticulous in its messiness, consistent in a way that patterns always are when the same person constructs them. More importantly, 2 of those transfers had occurred in a period during which Gerald Ashworth had declared to the IRS that the subsidiary was inactive. That was not my son's fraud. That was Gerald's. But Liam and Chloe's accounts were in the chain. I had not done this to destroy my son. I want to be clear about that, even now. I had done it because I believed that the people shaping his contempt for me were not who they claimed to be, and because I needed to know what was real. I had given the documentation to Diane. Diane had given it to Benjamin. Benjamin had given a referral to a contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, a senior agent named Marcus Webb, 21 years in federal tax enforcement, who had opened an inquiry 6 months prior. The inquiry was not public. The inquiry was ongoing. What Benjamin brought to Patricia's housewarming party was not the IRS file. He would not have brought that. It wasn't his to share, and Marcus Webb would not have sanctioned it. What he brought was something else entirely. The first document that appeared on Patricia's television was the deed to the Hartwell estate, executed in my name, dated 26 months ago. Purchase price, $2,280,000. Cash transaction. The room went quiet in a specific way, the way rooms go quiet when people are recalibrating. The second document was the renovation permit, which listed the contractors, the scope of work, and the total permitted value, $890,000. The third was a page from the most recent county property assessment, current Current assessed value, $4.1 million. These are not secret documents. Property records are public. Benjamin had simply obtained certified copies, printed them clearly, and organized them in a presentation that made the story unmistakable. There was a moment, and I watched it happen, where Patricia looked at the screen, and then looked at me in my gray dress, and the arithmetic shifted behind her eyes. Eleanor. Her voice had changed register. Hi, Patricia. I picked up my champagne flute. Liam had crossed the room. He was standing near the television, looking at the deed, looking at the number. His face had gone still in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child, when something had happened that exceeded his ability to react quickly. Mom, he said. What is this? That's the property I invited you to 2 years ago, I said. You tore up the invitation. Chloe's voice came from behind him, still controlled, though the edge had entered it. This is just property. This doesn't change. No, Benjamin agreed pleasantly. It doesn't change anything about property. You're right. He clicked to the next document. It was a summary, 1 page, prepared by Diane, stripped of the IRS referral language, presenting only the consulting LLC structure, the fund flows, and the dated transactions. It identified no specific wrongdoing. It simply showed, with reference documentation, where money had come from and where it had gone. It showed the accounts. Chloe saw her name. She stopped talking. This is a summary of some financial records that Mrs. Reyes's forensic accountant compiled as part of her own estate planning review, Benjamin said. His voice was pleasant and even and entirely without drama, the voice of someone explaining a routine matter. Some of it may be relevant to conversations you'll want to have privately. Some of it has already been referred to appropriate parties. He paused. We thought, given this evening's theme of transparency and success, that it might be worth presenting. The councilman near the back of the room had a particular expression on his face. He was an elected official in a district where Gerald Ashworth owned several commercial properties. He was thinking, visibly and carefully, about what he'd just seen. Patricia said nothing. She was looking at the page. She was looking at the consulting LLC name, which she recognized. She had to, because Chloe had formed it with her mother's operational support, and she was understanding, in real time, what the presence of that name in a forensic document meant. I'd like everyone to leave, she said. Her voice was still composed. I give her credit for that. People left, quickly, with the particular efficiency of guests who understand that the evening has ended for reasons they do not fully understand and do not wish to. The councilman left without speaking to Patricia. Chloe's tennis club friends left in a cluster, 2 of them already reaching for their phones. Liam stayed. He stood near the television, and the screen behind him showed the deed to a house he'd never visited, and he looked at me across a room full of empty champagne flutes. Mom, he said. Liam. I smoothed the front of my gray dress. I think you have some things to look into. I hugged Patricia at the door, one arm, genuine, because the house truly was beautiful and none of what was happening was about her house. Then I walked out to my 10-year-old Subaru, which I have driven for 17 years and have no intention of replacing, because it runs perfectly, and I like it. Benjamin caught up to me in the driveway. How'd we do? He said. I thought about Chloe's toast. People who build empires and people who just survive. About right, I said. That was 8 months ago. The IRS inquiry expanded. Marcus Webb, whose instincts had apparently confirmed what Diane's paperwork suggested, brought in a second agent and elevated the case. Gerald Ashworth, through his attorneys, entered into discussions about a voluntary disclosure program. The subsidiary that had originated the fund transfers was dissolved in February. Liam called me 6 weeks after the party. It was a Tuesday again, June again, almost exactly a year from the first call. I was in the garden again, this time at Hartwell, because I've been spending most of my time there now, and the roses I planted along the eastern fence are coming in stronger than I'd hoped. He didn't talk for a long time, just breathed on the line. Then he said, I didn't know, Mom. I know, I said. I said things. I know. The house, he said. The estate. I thought you were simple, I said. I know. Chloe told me. He cried. My son, 40 years old, cried on the phone with me in my garden, and I let him, and I didn't make it harder than it needed to be, because he was my son, and I had never stopped loving him, not even when I was pulling aphids off my roses with my bare hands and listening to his contempt. It's slow. It's not fixed. A person doesn't unbelieve something in a month or two, even when the evidence is in front of them, even when they understand they were given a distorted picture. Liam and Chloe are in couples counseling now, which I know because he told me and I chose not to have opinions about. He came to Hartwell in April for the first time, walked through the house without speaking for almost an hour. Then he found me in the library and said, the Cecile Brunners along the fence. You moved them from the garden at home. I took cuttings, I said. He sat down across from me. We didn't talk about Patricia's party. We didn't talk about the calls, the texts, the 2 years of his quiet permission of cruelty. There would be time for that, or there wouldn't. But that afternoon wasn't the moment. He looked around the library, the original millwork, the reading chairs I'd chosen with Miriam, the way the afternoon light came through the west-facing windows in long, useful rectangles, and said, you built this. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are adjusting an old understanding to fit new evidence. I know, he said. I'm starting to see it. Patricia's house is for sale. I checked the listing this morning, listed at $3, $8 million, which is a reasonable number for the location, though I think she'll have to come down slightly in this market. The interior photography is beautiful. Chloe's Consulting LLC was dissolved in March. Gerald Ashworth's voluntary disclosure is apparently ongoing. Benjamin hears things. I've stopped asking. Somewhere in a file at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, in the records of an agent named Marcus Webb, there are documents that show where money came from and where it went, and the people whose names appear in those documents are living, now, with that knowledge in a way they hadn't been living with it before. I did not set out to destroy anyone. I set out to know the truth, and to make sure when the moment came that the story being told about me in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter was finally, unmistakably, wrong. The morning after the party, I got up at 6 and walked the Hartwell grounds before the light fully came in. 11 acres. The lake was flat and dark, and the oaks along the eastern edge were going gold at the margins, the way they do in early summer when the season is just beginning to turn. I have a library with original millwork. I have Cecile Brunner roses along the fence. I have a son who is slowly, imperfectly, learning to look at his mother with different eyes, and I have a 10-year-old Subaru that runs perfectly, and a gray dress I will keep, and the quiet particular satisfaction of a woman who built something real and was content, for a very long time, to let other people decide she hadn't. They thought the silence was emptiness. It wasn't. It was patience.